There is no retreat, but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking may be heard on the plains of Boston. The war is inevitable, and let it come. I repeat, sir, let it come.
Today is Monday, December 21st, 2020. And if you live in London or any other southeast region of the UK, then you probably know what I want to talk about. And even if you don't, you can probably guess by using your brain. Today is the second day of Tier 4 coronavirus restrictions put in place across London and the southeast. And I wanted to do this video weeks and weeks ago, but I never got around to it because I was working crazy hours. I'm a self-employed person, and if I want to make a lot of money, I can, because I can do a lot of overtime, and technically there's no part-time, full-time, or overtime for me. It's just the amount of hours I put in is the amount of hours I get back in terms of earnings. And it is my voluntary decision to take time out of my day to make this video instead of going out and working, making however much money I want to make. What is not voluntary is, restrictions put in place by the government, taking away people's livelihood, taking away people's right to work in some cases, and just generally shutting down the economy. It's doing no good for the economy and the livelihood of our citizens, and it's all done to save the vulnerable people who would have died from pneumonia or any other common illness to begin with, because that's what this virus is. It's very similar to the flu, and if you die from the flu, then you are very likely to die from this illness. As a self-employed person, I do not get the same benefits that full-time or regularly employed people do. Currently not eligible to receive benefits for self-isolating. I can't receive that because I haven't been self-employed long enough to do so. Us self-employed people were affected differently by coronavirus, and it's not the same as people being furloughed, but we all suffer when people are furloughed and there's a stimulus package, because what people don't understand, and people who are not maybe economically literate fail to understand, is that this contributes to our national debt. And if we keep borrowing, it seems okay in the short run because maybe we will pay it back, but the amounts we've been borrowing, the billions and trillions that nations have been borrowing to deal with this coronavirus, will lead or could lead to our downfall. If we ever default on this national debt, then we are due for the worst recession that the world's ever seen, and it will make the Great Depression and the recession that we had just recently look like a total joke. And once people realize that, I think we have to realize that we cannot afford to keep shutting down nations and then just borrow money, give people free money. There's no such thing as a free lunch. People have to understand. There are two ways to reach herd immunity or otherwise cure ourselves of the pandemic. You can either do it through vaccination, and most governments have decided to lock down the country before we get a vaccination. Otherwise, there is the laxation solution where everybody is allowed to do what they want. They receive the virus, and then it spreads throughout society. Then, as we build immunity to it, the virus just simply goes away over time, and we stop having reactions to it. Both are viable solutions. However, they are not viable when a government just goes back and forth between either of them. You have to stick to one solution and then not back away from it. I personally don't mind if we lock down for a little while, or we lax everything and then allow everybody to just roam around and romp around like they've done in Turkey. You can't have it both ways. You can't switch between laxation and then just lock everything down. You can't do that because it's proven that it's inefficient. Our rates have gone up because we haven't stuck to one plan. We've gone back and forth.
But there is no peace. The war is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the crash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it the gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God! I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death!
I feel as though the "give me liberty or give me death" quote from Patrick Henry when he delivered it to the Virginia Second Convention on March 23rd, 1775, is probably the most relevant quote we can have today, because if the price of liberty is coronavirus, I would gladly accept it. I would rather die, asphyxiating while connected to a ventilator, than lose my right to work, lose my right to do the things I enjoy doing, like being physically fit, playing gigs, stuff like that. These are all things I hold dear to myself, and healthy individual does. We shouldn't punish the healthy by, protecting the sick. That's not the way society works. You want to protect the sick and then allow the healthy to function as normal individuals. You can't take away that right from them. On another topic, a lot of people have been blaming their world leaders, their nation's leaders, for their inabilities to basically solve coronavirus. And I just want to say it's not necessarily their fault, because everybody's been working on a vaccine. The question is whether they've been, what are the case-to-death ratios in those countries. And if they've been a lot higher than other countries, then fair enough, you have a reason to blame them. But if they're, if they're average, or they're probably one of the best ratios around, then why would you blame your leader for doing a pretty good, competent job? In Europe, they've been okay. I mean, the deaths are probably a lot lower than in Turkey, for instance. That's one thing for sure. They've been very lax in Turkey, and as a result, a lot of people have died. But also, Turkey will probably be the first country to recover if they haven't recovered already. So that's something to point out when you're trying to achieve herd immunity. And then secondly, if we look at states across the U.S. and their responses to Donald Trump, I think the reason why Donald Trump lost the election is primarily because of coronavirus and how people perceived his ability to handle things, even though I think he handled the coronavirus thing effectively. He did everything right. I can do another video on that if needed be. But the statistics are that 17.7 million people have died in the U.S. 317,000 have died. That's 1.79% of the population. That's a lot better than in a lot of countries in Europe and most of the world, for instance. But it really depends on what state you're talking about. And for instance, California, Texas, Florida have all done a pretty good job. They're not the states that have been affected that badly because of considering of how populated they are and how densely populated they are. In California, 1.85 million people were infected, and then 22.7 thousand died. So that's only 1.2% of the population. In Texas, 1.59 million people were infected, but only 25.8 thousand died. That's 1.6% of the population. In Florida, 1.7% of the population. If you look at who blamed Trump, particularly Democrats, and then you look at the averages in Democrats and Republican states, you'll find that actually the highest death rate across all states in the U.S. happened in two Democrat states. They are both tied for the highest across the entire USA. They are New York and New Jersey. In New York, 842,000 people were infected, which is a fairly low number. However, 35.9 thousand died, and that's 4.2%. Tied in that same place of 4.2% is New Jersey. They're both Democrat states. What's also interesting is that the Democratic state with the lowest case-to-death ratio is Oregon, and that was actually 1.3%, so it was still fairly, statistically significant. And if we compare that to Republicans, you'll see that the highest case-to-death ratio for Republican states was only 2.5%, which was Louisiana. On the contrary, the lowest case-to-death ratio in Republican states was Alaska. And that's pretty obvious why, but nevertheless, the fact still stands, it was only 0.4%. So just think about the irony behind the Democrats who have been, name-calling Trump and calling him incompetent for not being able to deal with coronavirus, and somehow attributing the 300,000 deaths to him when it was their states where the case-to-death ratios were the highest. That's why actually I believe the most ethical solution is that we allow the healthy people to work and keep their lives and not punish them, while protect the people who are actually vulnerable if they need it, if they really need that assistance. And not all vulnerable old people need financial assistance. Some people have, like most elderly people have a decent pension that will allow them to buy groceries or whatever, or they have savings. So the fact that you're giving a lot of benefits to people, I'm not sure all of them need it. It's on them to ensure their being financially solvent. The only way you do that is by allowing the productive people to stay productive. So I really appreciate everyone who's stuck around to this point to listen to what I have to say. I really hope that you make your voice heard by allowing your government to know that you will not stand for another lockdown, or you want them to be more consistent. I think it's at least one of those two things that you really want. I think everyone wants the government to be consistent. Nobody wants their government to go back and forth between one or the other. I don't see how you can actually rationalize that position. In case you wanted to know what my shirt was saying, you kind of noticed it, but you couldn't make out what it said. Here it is. If you really like it, I can probably put a link in the description. It's not like I get paid. I didn't make the shirt, so I won't get paid to give you that link. But if you like it, you can get it from that link. I really hope you took away something from this video, and even if you disagree with me, you can comment down below. But otherwise, if you enjoyed it, then I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. And otherwise, I hope you have a blessed Christmas.